Friends, we're gonna start our notes on concept 4, which is about phylogeny. This is a final set of notes for evolution that we're gonna take. So I'm gonna do a quick little overview of another concept before we actually get into phylogeny, um, because it all kind of plays a part together. So before we can talk about phylogeny, we're going to talk about something called taxonomy. And this is a field of biology that there are scientists that work to classify organisms. They want to group them based on similarities, differences, stuff like that. Most commonly, I'm assuming you know, like mammals. That is a taxonomic um, grouping that scientists have created. So we'll organize organisms by similar characteristics. Um, all of life has been divided into something called a domain. There's three of them, and they represent different things. The first domain is called the eubacteria, which are prokaryotes. If you remember prokaryotes from cells, those are single-celled organisms without a nucleus. And these are our true bacteria, like pathogens. Whenever you get a bacterial infection, that is actually a living species in your body that your body's trying to fight off. And these are what we normally think of as regular bacteria. The next domain is called archaeobacteria. These are also prokaryotes, but they only live in extreme environments. They're actually only found recently in the last like 20 years or so, living in like, what are they called? Steam vents by volcanoes and stuff, and in world hot spots, the hot water places. I'm drawing a blank on what they're called. So they only live in extreme environments, and they're unique. They're not like anything else. And the final domain is called the eukarya, which are eukaryotes. Those are cells or those are organisms that have the different organelles, the nucleus, DNA, stuff like that. DNA in the nucleus. We can also then divide those domains, those three domains, into um, further subdivisions: kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. At one point, we used to make you memorize all that, so be glad you don't need to. Um, this is an ongoing process, and it adjusts as new evidence is found. Like things change, um, what families they're in, what orders they're in, stuff like that, as scientists learn more and more about the organism. For instance, phylogeny is now included to help us classify organisms. As we're going to define phylogeny in a minute, but that's about evolutionary history, and that now helps taxonomists to classify organisms. So this dude, Carlos Linnaeus, is considered the father of taxonomy. He's the one that kind of like came up with this binomial nomenclature, which means two names, two name naming system. So whenever you name a species, you're going to have both its genus name and its species name in it. The last two on this little chart. So it's always written in italics, and then the genus, whatever that is always going to be capitalized, and the species is not. So let's look at these two bears. We have two different species of bears. One is Urus arctois, and the other one is Urus martimus. And you can tell by the genus that they're part of the same like group. They're both types of bears, and that's why the genus is the same for both of them. So phylogeny, like I said before, is evolutionary history of a species. How has it changed over time? What is its common ancestors? Stuff like that. We know that about 3.5 billion years ago, the very first life forms were present on Earth, and that was a prokaryote, a single-celled organism. And it took a while, till about 2.1 billion years ago, for the first eukaryote to evolve through something called endosymbiosis, where one prokaryote ended up inside of another, and both organisms then were able to thrive and to live and reproduce. And this is endosymbiotic theory suggests that over time, coevolution of two prokaryotes occurred and eventually led to speciation, or the creation of a new species, and that's what created the very first eukaryote. This is a theory. It's highly supported with evidence, and um, most scientists agree with it, but it's never going to be proven because nobody was there to say yes or no to this. So it is believed through this theory that all organisms share a common ancestor, and that's how phylogeny works. It pieces together evolutionary history of relatedness based on shared inherited characteristics like DNA. So this is what a phylogenetic tree looks like over there on the right. It's a diagram used to predict the relationship among groups of organisms. Each branch point, so each time the um, tree kind of branches off into a separate direction, that shows a new species diverging from a common ancestor. Hypotheses are based upon analyzing shared morphology, so those structures and body parts, as well as genes, and then also behaviors. Like, are they nocturnal? Do they hunt? Stuff like that. Those are all things that are considered within a phylogenetic tree. And then maximum parsimony uses the simplest explanation for creating the tree. It creates the easiest connections between all of the different organisms in our tree. So looking at this tree, um, so we can classify organisms into major taxa or groups based on their evolutionary relationships. In other words, classifying groups of species in order in which they descended from a common ancestor using homologous features, so similar features between them. So any heritable traits such as DNA, protein, anatomical structures that are the result of divergent evolution are used to create these charts. So from a tree, we can learn a couple things. We can see which groups are most closely related. We can see which ones are least closely related. And then which group diverged first or the longest ago. So let's look at this example of how to read this chart. They all look pretty similar. They all are branching. They create these weird, like, little cutoff points. But we always want to start at the root or the bottom, and that's the common ancestor that all the organisms on the tree evolved from. This is a very bottom point down here. So whatever this organism was, that's the common ancestor for A, B, C, D, E, and F. As you move away from that point, so in this case, as you move up, you're moving forward in time. So common ancestor, long, long, long time ago. Speciation, or the creation of new species, is happening every time there's a new branch of a family tree. So like right here, we've gotten a new speciation. The tree is split, so we've created a new species. We can also show when a branch goes extinct. That's what this line up here is showing us. It says that this line stopped. It no longer was part of this evolutionary history. And each node represents a more recent ancestor. So a node is like every branch point like that. So that at this point right here, we're talking about the common ancestor for D, C, D, E, and F, not the ones that came before it. How not to read them. This is really important. A lot of students mess up when they're trying to read them. It does not show us how A turns into B, B turns into C, C turns into D. For example, bacteria into amoeba, into insect, into trout, into humans, and bird is not correct, reading from left to right. And they're not showing us that A is greater than B, or greater than C, or greater than D. In other words, humans are not greater than trout, which is not greater than insects. These are trees, not ladders. They're just branching points. They spread out. And then the last thing we want to be able to do is be able to predict from a tree. So looking at this tree, what can we predict from it? We can predict common ancestor. We can figure out where all of these organisms kind of came together. Like humans and chimpanzees are very closely related on here, but we're then also the next closest related to humans would be like gorillas and then orangutans. It's all about the closeness of relatedness. So that's all I have on phylogeny. If you would like to answer the summary question at the bottom of this page for me, I would appreciate that. Thank you.